Welcome. This is the presentation for the validation report for the Happy Town Police Force. My name is Lane Pollock, Principal Consultant and co-founder of True Consulting. I will be speaking for the first part of the presentation, and then my business partner, Ariane Mann, will join me for the second half. I want to start off by extending our appreciation for this opportunity to work with your organization. We have certainly enjoyed our time with you and cannot speak highly enough of the Happy Town Police Force. Now let's jump into the analysis. In the fall of 2019, True Consulting, a small women-owned consulting firm based out of Northern Virginia, was approached by the Happy Town Police Commissioner's Office to provide validation evidence for a selection system to be used for incoming police officers. True Consulting agreed to assist the Happy Town Police Force in choosing the best and most comprehensive assessment tools that will accurately predict the successful performance of incoming cadets. The selection system at the time of analysis consisted of 4 assessments: interviews, general mental ability or GMA, knowledge, and in-basket. The validation analysis would take an in-depth look into each one of these assessments and their success in measuring performance of police officers. To begin, True Consulting investigated each assessment separately. From this investigation, we found that interviews measured conscientiousness, openness, and problem-solving abilities. Interviews consisted of personality-related questions, such as, what do you consider to be your greatest failure and what did you learn from it? And it also consisted of situation-based questions, such as, if you saw an officer committing a crime, what would you do? And so on and so forth. The GMA, if you recall, this stands for General Mental Ability Assessment, measures the ability of police officers to learn new concepts. This assessment consisted of a written comprehension section, as well as problem sensitivity and reasoning. The knowledge assessment measured problem solving and critical thinking skills using simulation-based video games where the police officers were able to mimic interactive activities. And finally, our investigation of the in-basket assessment found that it measured administrative skills, such as prioritizing, and it did so through a series of multiple choice questions based on typical day-to-day activities or tasks. Once we understood the role of each of the 4 assessments, our consulting team was then able to begin the process of analysis of each assessment for validity. Validity allows us to evaluate whether an assessment accurately predicts what it measures. In this case, validation allows our consultants to evaluate if these assessments accurately predict performance in police officers. Validation is particularly important, not only from a legal perspective, which we will get into later in this presentation, but also because it ensures that Happy Town Police Force is hiring a strong and diverse police force.
Hi, this is Ariane Mann. So going off what Lane just said, we used a multiple regression to evaluate the correlations or the relationships between the criterion, which were interviews, GMA, job knowledge, and in-basket, as well as performance. We found that each predictor offered some information as to the candidate's future performance. The higher the correlation, the higher the predicted performance. The GMA, which has the highest correlation, offers the most information toward a police officer's predicted performance. The next highest was in-basket, followed by interviews, and finally job knowledge, which offered the least amount of information beyond what the GMA already provided. One of the biggest advantages of using a single predictor, such as the GMA, is linearity, which makes the regression model easy to read and predict. Unfortunately, it only offers a one-dimensional explanation, which is very unusual in human behavior. Using multiple predictors, such as the interview in basket and job knowledge, it can pick up where the single predictor model left off, giving a fuller picture of predicted performance. However, we must be diligent with the number of predictors because the more we include, the more complicated the calculations and the more cumbersome the model. As you may remember, the GMA produced the largest validity coefficient of 0.489, meaning that the GMA accounted for approximately 49% of the variability. When examining the F statistic of this model, we found that the GMA is a significant predictor of performance. When adding the other predictors, so the interviews, job knowledge, and in-basket, we found that the validity coefficient increased to 0.512, with the F statistic showing that all 4 variables significantly predict performance. This increase in validity coefficient indicates that additional predictors are needed to better understand the relationship between the assessments and future job performance of Happy Town police officers. The Taylor-Russell model is a strategy used to calculate the effectiveness of selection tests. In regards to Happy Town Police, we use this model to find the percent of officers selected who will also perform satisfactorily on the job. The Taylor-Russell table takes into account the base rate, which is the proportion of successful people using the selection method. It also uses the validity of the assessment to make sure the test is measuring what we want, and the selection ratio, which is the number of officers hired divided by the total number of applicants. Applying these 3 numbers to the Taylor-Russell model highlights the number of selected applicants who will also be satisfactory performers, which is known as the true positive. According to the Taylor-Russell model, the higher the validity, the greater the chance of the test being useful. When there is a base rate of 0.50, the selection measures are most applicable. There are 10 Taylor-Russell tables to choose from, each representing a different base rate. Since Happy Town Police has a base rate, which is the proportion of employees considered satisfactory, of 0.50, we use the corresponding table. We then match the validity of each predictor to the closest R value, followed that row until we reach the corresponding selection ratio, which gave us the utility. According to the Taylor-Russell model, the lower the selection ratio, the higher the utility. This means that the more selective the Happy Town Police Department is in hiring, the greater the chance of hiring an officer who is also a good performer. For example, the true positive. For example, again, looking at the GMA utility, which had the highest validity of all 4 measures, the chance of hiring a good performer is 84% when only 10% of the officers are hired. Yet, when 90% of the officers are hired, the utility drops to 54%, leaving the police force vulnerable to hiring low performers. Comparing the GMA utility to the knowledge measure, we see that the knowledge measure had the lowest validity, and even the lowest selection ratio, which 10%, should yield the highest utility. It only resulted in 64%. When utilizing employee selection instruments, one approach is the top-down strategy, which is a technique that chooses the highest scoring individuals. The top score is chosen to fill the open position, and any other open positions are filled with the next top score, and so on. Though this may be a logical way of choosing the best officers, it also results in the most adverse impact. Adverse impact is the unintentional discrimination of a particular group in the selection process. This type of discrimination occurs when the same standards and procedures are applied to all applicants, yet lead to members of a certain group being selected more often. This is especially relevant to the Happy Town Police Force in that public employers are subject to fines upwards of $300,000 per complaint if evidence of adverse impact is found in their selection process. To ensure adverse impact had not occurred in the selection process, we compared the selection ratios across all group of applicants. When applying the hiring data to the uniform guidelines, we concluded that these assessments violate the 4/5 rule and therefore show evidence of adverse impact. We also ran a differential prediction analysis on the top 2 valid predictors to see if they predicted job performance differently for each race. We found significant evidence of adverse impact in the selection methods. Looking at the scatter plots, both have a common regression line in black, which is the regression line for all subgroups combined. a green line representing the minority group, and a blue line representing the non-minority group. Let's start with the GMA. The scatter plot on the left indicates bias specific to the intercept and slope, which means the GMA does not offer the same predictive power for minority group members as it does for non-minority group. To see the bias in the slope, we look at where the subgroups intersect. In our case, they cross paths outside the operational test score range, which means the minority group will always be underpredicted. The black line, the common regression line, is consistently above the green line. The minority group scores showing the bias and intercept. The next highest valid measure was the in-basket. We found significant bias only in the intercept, which means that the same in-basket score leads to systematically different predictions for one group versus the other. Looking at the scatter plot on the right, the green line is well below the common regression line. It's important to keep the differential predictions in mind by ensuring the relevance of the measures. But there are ways to reduce adverse impact and still utilize these measures, which I will explain next. So after reviewing the results, True Consulting has come up with several recommendations that will allow the Happytown Police Department to confidently select diverse and qualified officers. We suggest you utilize the GMA, in-basket, and interview as your performance predictors. These three offer the highest validity, with the GMA and in-basket serving as the top two valid measures respectively. Because of a bias in the GMA and in-basket, we recommend including the interview, which should minimize group differences. Through the use of the three predictors, we also recommend a use of a multiple hurdle strategy. For example, applicants would need to meet the minimum requirements on the GMA and interview before moving on to the next hurdle of in-basket. By including the interview with the GMA, group differences will be minimized, allowing a more diverse applicant pool to move to the next level. Interviewers need to receive advanced training in how to perform a structured interview to ensure a similar experience with each candidate and minimize discrimination. By placing the in-basket in the second hurdle, only those with the minimum qualifications will be tested, maximizing the department's resources. There are a few steps to be considered for the reduction of adverse impact and to increase your workforce diversity. The first option is to adjust the cut scores by lowering the benchmark required for all applicants. The second option is to utilize score banding, which offers a range of scores or band to equal the same score. The third option is to broaden the definition of job performance to go beyond quality and quantity of work and include other factors such as staying calm or volunteering to take on extra work. By opening up the idea of an adequate performer, other methods that focus more on personality and consequently minimize adverse impact, such as the interview, could be utilized. We want you to be aware that predictive power becomes reduced when cut scores are lowered or score banding is implemented, though the importance of reducing adverse impact really outweigh the loss of predictive power. We at True Consulting believe that, should the recommendations stated above be implemented, Happytown Police Force will find that they have a well-rounded selection process that results in the selection of high-performing officers. Thank you very much.
We want to thank you again for allowing us to participate in this validation report. And any questions or comments, please refer to our email, trueconsulting@email.com.